Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sufficiency and Wellbeing Experience. We are building a media organization together with Nairita, with Vlad, with myself, and other co-editors who are today not with us. And we will have today our episode 7, where we are going to talk about democracy and how can we apply procedures that helps us to improve the democratic quality both in our life and in the economy. And after 30 minutes, you are also encouraged to join our episode 8 for paid subscribers, where we are going to explain some experience of truly democratic or undemocratic experiences on our own skins. I just hand over to Vlad, who's going to kick off the conversation today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So for today, I prepared some observations about the state of democracy in the world. This morning, I tried to find the Democracy Index report that is published annually by the Economist Intelligence Unit. So they have a democracy index, which is based on 5 categories. And these are electoral process and pluralism, functioning of government. Use these 5 categories to make the democracy index. And based on the scores on a range of indicators within these categories, each country is classified as one of the 4 types of regime. You have full democracy, you have flawed democracy, you have a hybrid regime, or authoritarian regime. We have 25 countries classified as full democracies, and that's 6.6% of the world population. We have 46 countries classified as flawed democracies, which is 38% of the world population. We have 36 countries classified as hybrid regimes, and that's 15% of the world population. And we have 60 countries classified as authoritarian regimes, and that's 39% of the world population. The report shows that in the past maybe 8 to 10 years, democracy indices have tended to go down across the board and across the 6 categories. And they attempt some explanations about what happened. If we open the report, which I will link to it at the bottom, they give all sorts of explanations. For example, let me see, trust in government is failing. That's one of the reasons. Mm-hmm. Politicians are failing. Another reason. And within each category, they say there's an equality deficit, which leads to a decrease in democratic indices. Mm-hmm. There's a party deficit. And I quote, until the 1980s, voters' collective identities and attachment to political parties were remarkably stable. The process by which political parties began to disconnect from and eventually lose touch with their original social constituencies was a gradual one. That means political parties are not doing the traditional job that they were doing until now. Mm-hmm. Another subcategory is a choice deficit. Dissatisfied citizens often say that political parties are all the same. Competing political parties with clear policy alternatives provide the foundations of representative government. And these competing policy alternatives are beginning to blur, and many citizens feel that mainstream parties have converged towards the political center. Mm-hmm. And that's what the report says. Mm-hmm.
Matt, could you clarify what you mean by what the report meant by the citizens converging over the political center? Because I want to understand what they mean by the center and the margins or whatever.
Well, the report doesn't define clearly the political center. So my interpretation is that traditionally on the left-right spectrum, the center itself is pretty much in the middle of the left-right divide, as understood in historical perspective. So before the 1980s, the center would probably have advocated for progressive taxation, a good social welfare system across the board. That would have been the center before 1980, and that center has moved gradually towards the right, meaning more emphasis on the market, less unions, less redistribution by the state. And in the United States, the center has been traditionally more on the right side compared to Europe and elsewhere. So the center now in the US is probably on the right side where Europe was 10 or 15 years ago. So the convergence towards the center, when the center was also moving, has happened gradually across the board in all countries, according to the report.
I was going to ask Vlad, how is Israel and China doing?
Well, let's see.
I can guess, but let's wait. I guess
So Israel is classified as a flawed democracy.
Okay.
Flawed democracy,
Yeah.
yes. But the neighboring countries, Jordan is authoritarian, Iraq is authoritarian, Kuwait is authoritarian.
What is the difference between flawed and authoritarian? I mean, I don't know.
Is the score they have, the democracy score across the 6 categories. So the report shows a number. For example, a score of 7.8 classifies as a flawed democracy. So
and these are based on certain indicators, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So I haven't looked at the methodology, but it seems that they have rules on how to calculate across the 6 categories I mentioned.
Yeah.
And they build a table for all the countries and they build those 4 categories.
Yeah. I think as long as you have clearly elections and some minimum rule of law, right? I think you already score quite high, right? So having elections that are approved internationally and constitution that is ratified by this parliament, I think would already allow you to score fairly high, right?
Yes, I think so. And they also operate on the assumption that political democracy is largely based on electoral democracy, in which you have political parties representing certain ideologies or group identities, that you have regular elections every 4 years or so. And that's how a government is put in place, are not looking at alternative democratic systems. And here's where I want to segue the conversation into my particular area of interest, which is changing electoral democracy with full participatory democracy based on a qualified random selection of representatives. And this is a subject I've been interested in for the past few years. So the more I look at it, the more I see it as the way to go to fix democracy across the planet. And sure, it's not easy to implement. And one of the authors that I've been following, Terry Boricius, he's American based in Vermont. He thinks that it's going to take a while until new democratic systems will be implemented. And all the flaws of our current democratic regime is based on the design of the system that relies on elections, on political parties, and on an entire industry of intermediaries that sit between citizens and representatives. The idea is to get rid of that middle layer of institutions and connect citizens directly with government. And the way to do that is to elect representatives randomly, much like juries are selected in North America and Canada, US, and the United Kingdom. It's largely based on a random selection that is qualified to some extent, and I can talk about that. Legislatures will be replaced by a system of governance that is comprised of several institutional bodies. Terry Boricius, for example, suggests 6 bodies to replace parliament and government, and each body has its own design and its own purpose. So one body, for example, will be tasked to design law. You get selected for that body at random from the citizenry, and then you get qualified. That qualification is largely based on an ability to function and be cognitively competent, so to speak, in order to conduct conversation and reasoned debate. And there are other ways to qualify citizens for this body. For example, you can qualify them by certain demographics. So if you want to have proper representation by gender, you can use algorithms in the lottery draw to ensure that both women and men are represented equally in that body. And that's, for example, you can draw by social insurance numbers, or you can draw randomly by date of birth or by region. So you can come up with all these algorithms and variables to make sure you have proper representation. And then there's a random draw, much like you qualified cognitively for jury selection. Once people are selected from the pool of citizens, you take them through a process of qualification. So you either sit them on a panel with other citizens and they ask each other questions, or they are asked to complete surveys or all sorts of questionnaires or submit video interviews, or just be present in a sort of a job shadowing capacity with someone who's already on the job. They do a period of training in which they are observed by their peers and they are qualified by their peers. For example, if they observe antisocial behavior or psychopathic behavior or extreme bias, their peers will rule them out. They will not accept them into the process. There are many ways in which you can qualify people. I will show you in the next episode from personal experience how I was selected to be potentially be part of a jury. And part of the selection process, I was supposed to complete a questionnaire. It was very generic. And I was just asking a few questions. Then the judge would go over the questionnaire. And if he saw something wrong, he would just have a conversation in court with everybody else to probe my situation. And that was it. And once they had 12 people, the jury was selected, and that's it. So it can be done. It's much easier than imagined. I argue that this way of upgrading democracy, not just politically, but also economically, is a way to rule out biases and all that unnecessary time and energy spent with the institutional middlemen, which are our elected politicians today, and those captured by ideology or group identities. So if all of that goes away, and if any citizen has equal chance of being randomly selected to participate in government, there will be higher chances of representing the will of the people, which is what the word democracy is about. And in fact, I go as far as to argue that this is the purest and more direct way of connecting with the will of the person, of the citizen. And it is the first form of democracy that has been attempted in human history by ancient Athenians. But it was not perfect at that time because only men were eligible to be selected, only free men that did not serve as slaves. So we can fix that and have everybody included. So there's ways to improve that system. And throughout history, random selection was used by different polities like Venice and various cities in Europe as a system to elect their government. Of course, it was not most inclusive, but we can make it most inclusive today. When I advocate for random qualified selection, also known as sortition, I have this in mind. I have all the problems that come with our electoral system today. And I also have in mind the need to democratize our economy. As we know, our economic system is not just non-democratic, it's anti-democratic. Because if you think about it, all economic agents, corporations, businesses do not have elected managers and people in power. Everybody is placed in that position by somebody above them or by virtue of owning capital. So if you have capital, then you can make yourself a boss, a manager, or an executive, and then you construct your entire pyramid of power and nobody can challenge your position. You are free to leave the pyramid, at least we have that, but is that really freedom? Capitalism sells freedom as choice of leaving your employer, but in reality is a pretty much a slave-like system in which freedom is not real and democracy is completely lacking.
You explained very well how power in decisions over political decisions will be made, how the governance of corporations or economic agents will be changed. Maybe what we can do the rest of the episode is to sharpen this and see, first of all, a transition towards this, because we will not get from the systems that we have now to that system without some steps. And second, which are the dangers that also this system could still have.
So there's a way to use a combination of sortition also in the economic system. One example would be to elect managers from a qualified pool of volunteers. So let's say whoever is interested in becoming a manager for a limited time puts their name up for selection, and then the team qualifies them. So you can have criteria for management, possess certain skills or have certain competencies or even certain experience. So the group decides what those competencies are. People who have them are qualified for that by the group. And then you have a pool of candidates from which a manager or an executive is randomly selected for a limited term. And then they rotate on that position. And even power, I think, has to be reformed. Under an economic democracy system, people in power would not have the ability to dismiss those below them as they do now. It's the opposite. The pyramid of power is reversed. And this is to save the argument of efficiency. Like, you can make the argument that you do need some sort of hierarchical structure for the sake of efficiency, but that doesn't mean that that structure of efficiency has to be based on a hierarchy of power as well. That's the problem that we have today, that everything is concentrated at the top, including power, including ownership. Everything is at the top. So if you want to preserve some sort of efficiency with temporary leaders that do not have that much power, that are based on skill or based on task, you can preserve the efficiency, but rotate the people in position, randomly select them from time to time. And in this way, you don't get managers grow roots in their position, and you don't preserve or continue the system in which experience in power is a prerequisite for belonging to that echelon of self-selected elites. So to break the system of elites, you have to rotate people in positions of power.
When I was listening to you, I was wondering something that hugely damaged our so-called democracies is the possibility of large capital owners to finance the campaigns of certain parties and to support financially those parties, right? And you see, this is perpetuating the capacity of some people to be political agents and the capacity of some people for never being political agents. Because if you run a crowdfunding campaign to create a party and to try to be part of the elections, it's much harder than if you already go for corporations, give you a couple of millions because they know they will make hundreds of millions when you are ruling, right? So this is the first thing. How do we stop capital from co-opting our political spaces and from buying people? Because even if you sort people, as long as capital exists the way it is, they will go after the people who were selected and they will give them enough money to do whatever they want. So that's, I think, the first danger I see. And the second danger I see is, especially in bioregion spaces or places where there are key decisions to be made on common land, the possibilities of people that you have to choose or you can choose are not so very broad. So the fact that someone is capable or the fact that someone is randomly selected, it's not enough to create the agency that this person have the agency or should be the one being taken decision on that region because of who is going to be affected, because of there are people who have been worked very hard to preserve that landscape, for example. So I just want to bring these two topics quickly, so maybe we can sharpen together how do we get there, and how do we overcome the threats, even if that system is implemented? Maybe Nairita, you want to add something or go in that direction?
Not really, because I'm also coming at the notion of democracy from a very different angle. For me, what is important is like it's important for us to be clear about what we understand by citizenship before we talk about democracy. And to actually, so my critique comes from the substantive aspects, like what do we actually mean by democracy and why do we need to understand citizenship? And my understanding of citizenship, contemporary citizenship, is that from what I hear about the index that Vlad shared, is completely human centric. Like none of these, like what you, like my understanding of citizenship basically is it decides who belongs and also distributes the rights and responsibilities within a certain bounded space. And usually this bounded space ends up being the nation state. And also the question of who belongs is also limited to the human subject. I mean, we never include the other ecological members, such as the non-human lives. We don't account for that within these scores. And once we understand that our existing notion of citizenship is very limited, and this question is important because we are living at a time where we have crossed, like, 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. And the notion of the existing notion of citizenship is then becomes a deciding factor as to like who belongs, like, what kind of ecological members belongs. And humans are a part of the ecosystem. I don't see humans as the center of the subject, the political subject. But and then democracy adds to the notion of citizenship by, you know uh, helping us question, like, to what extent are we making the to what extent are we making citizens feel heard, whose voices are accounted for, and what is the extent of participation within the framing of democracy. So these kind of substantive aspects is what troubles me first, before deciding on like these scores and indicators and stuff like that. Because our contemporary understanding of the economy, the polity that includes citizenship, democracy, all these understandings are based by centering the human subject and human subjectivity. While human subjectivity is important, but it is not important to center the human subject as the center. And like, I think these questions sort of became even more important because I mean, I'm not sure whether these experiences have to be shared in the second half of this episode, but it's sort of aligns with what I'm talking right now. So what happened was I think 2 weeks back, or it was last week itself. I don't really exactly remember what is happening in cities like Kolkata, which also shares spaces with the mangrove ecosystem, which is known as the Sundarbans. And a lot of cities like Kolkata, that it's quite common for the evening bats to, intrude upon households, urban households. And they are referred to as intruders because our assumption of like spaces is based on, this concrete or the cement, and which is inhabited by humans, even if that is actually not true. But when there was a bat, there was an evening bat living in my house for like 48 hours, and it was circling the rooms. It was just changing one room to another. And it was a scary moment. But at that time, what I was thinking, like, it disturbed my assumptions of what I understand by space, citizenship. At that point of time, I was uncomfortable. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is an intruder. And I was thinking from the anthropocentric lens, but it sort of raised these complicated questions about who belongs within a certain space of citizenship, and then whose democracy counts at the end. And
yes, just to do a little bit of housekeeping, because we are over the time. Maybe we can give the last minute to wrap up a little bit and to invite people to the episode 8 when we talk about how do we experience democracy, and maybe we can integrate also these elements. I totally agree that other living beings that have not a voice have to be integrated, right? And how do we give rights and voice to rivers, to the soil, to other creatures that deserve and have the rights to have a space or to live together with us, and also to integrate all of this. So I'm not sure if Vlad, you want to make a very last remark about what we said, or should we go just to the for the paid subscriber to explain our experiences with regard democracy?
Maybe quickly, a last remark is that to your observation, that how do we make the transition to such a new, different way of organizing democracy? So there are experiments that have been done mostly with the citizen assemblies, which are small scale examples of how selection by qualified randomness can work. And many of these citizen assemblies have been tasked to upgrade constitutions or to suggest electoral reform, all sorts of tasks in many countries, and they work. So these are examples that democracy can function in a different way. And in terms of the economic democracy, the closest example that comes to a different system are the co-ops, the cooperatives. Some of them are organized around full participatory engagement from workers and members. Not all of them. Some cooperatives are still top-down hierarchies with no elections. So there are attempts on how to improve the system. So in the second half, we'll talk more from personal experience, and I'll share some of my experience at my jury duty this week and some conversation I had with my fellow citizens.
Awesome. See you there. Bye.